Hello and welcome to Speak Up, Listen Up, Follow Up, the podcast from the National Guardian's office. Throughout October's Speak Up month, the National Guardian for the NHS, Dr. Jayne Chidgey-Clark, will be in conversation with leaders exploring this year's theme of freedom to speak up for everyone. And she'll be exploring the impact speaking up can bring to safety, civility and inclusion. In our third episode, Jayne speaks to Lord Victor Adebowale, the chair of the NHS Confederation, about Week 3's theme, Speak Up for Inclusion.
You have to accept that your job is to run everywhere all the time. Not some people, somewhere, some of the time.
We hope you enjoy this episode, and now over to Jayne.
Good morning, Victor. It's absolutely great to be here with you on the third of our Speak Up Month podcasts to discuss really important. We start discussing some of those. Can I just ask you as an intro for our listeners what freedom to speak up means to you?
Well, to me, it means psychological safety. Well, to put it, I mean, bluntly, it means a safe place to work. It's not difficult. A safe place to work, a safe place to deliver care. I mean, it's pretty basic, to be honest. I think it's a bit strange in a way that we've got a campaign that's freedom to speak up, because what's the opposite of freedom to speak up? So it just seems to be pretty basic. It should be psychological safety, the ability to use your judgment and speak your mind within that context. It's just really, really obvious.
Yeah, thank you, Victor. And actually, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because freedom to speak up should be business as usual, but the very fact that it isn't, because of what we see happening in too many workplaces, means that we do have to have running campaigns like this and the work to highlight how important it is to create that psychological safety. So that's a great place to start. I mean, we're here in our third week of Speak Up Month, and particularly the focus for this week is on inclusion. Is indeed at the heart of freedom to speak up. And I wonder, as we're also in Black History Month, what your reflections are on this and the importance of inclusion in speaking up.
Well, I mean, first of all, I should tell you that I don't really do Black History Month because there's only one history and it has black people in it. So I don't really get them. But, I'll go along with the fashion. But I think it's, because does that mean the rest of the months I don't have Black history, and it's bizarre. But I think you can't have freedom to speak up unless you've got an anti-racist workplace. It's as simple as that. I know you've used the word inclusion, and I agree as a normative statement. But if you can't talk about race, you really can't talk about much else. Because last time I looked, black people were LGBTQ, they were women, they were disabled, they were, neurodiverse. So, we sorted slavery out pretty much before we sorted everything else out. So my view is you can't talk race, you can't really do inclusion. Mm-hmm. And so it's a fundamental to my mind. And I set up the Independent Race and Health Observatory partly because I observed that race was a very challenging thing for people to talk about, and black and minority ethnic staff were the least likely to speak up about their experiences, and that puts everyone at risk. So and the Workforce Race Equality Standard did point out that places where it was unsafe to be black were also unsafe to be white. So I think it's it's a fundamental, you can't really separate the two.
Absolutely. I think you've hit a real key thing there. And I guess, so if we accept absolutely that race is fundamental, can you, from your experience, talk a little about what you feel are the key actions that leaders within organisations and organisations as a whole can take to ensure that inclusion is at the heart of what they do? Because if they don't, then it's not a safe place to be.
It isn't. Again, I think the simplest things are usually the truest. I do say to leaders, and I coach people, and I say to them, you have to accept that your job is to lead everyone everywhere all the time, not some people somewhere some of the time. And it's a choice. You know, if you decide that you're going to lead some people somewhere some of the time, then you should be paid less. It's quite straightforward. If you're going to lead all the people everywhere all the time, then you have to understand the people that you serve as a leader. And it means you have to understand that who you are, what you say, who you say it to, where you say it, how you say it, when you say it, are all relevant to leadership. And most health systems are complex adaptive systems in which small changes can have disproportionate effects. The most powerful intervention you can make in any organisation is a conversation. And it strikes me that leaders have to be consciously aware of how they are in the space that they occupy as leaders. And they have to own the fact that their job is to lead everyone, everywhere, all the time, which means understanding race. It's not an option. I'm really surprised at conversations I hear and have in health and care where it's seen as a kind of option. You know, it's like, I'll do everything else and then I'll do inclusion, or I'll talk about race, but it's as an addition to my day job, or I'll leave it until, you know, an addition to my day job, or I'll leave it until, you know, or I'll have a group to do it for me, or I'll hire somebody to do it for me. And I just think that's unacceptable. In short, it's you, it's no one else.
Yeah. And that's a really powerful message. And there's two things that there's lots I've picked up in there, but two I guess want to particularly hone in on, and I don't know if you want to say any more about them. But the first is that deep recognition that as leaders, all leaders, we need to be consciously aware of what we're doing all the time and really reflect on that, and to every day, as you say, everybody, all the time, every day, and being reflective, being mindful of that, not just, oh, it's my point in my diary when I think about this as an issue. So that was number one. The second is in relation to not delegating it, but actually leading it the whole time. And yes, groups can be part of it, can't they? And they, you know, your EDI forums, equality and diversity inclusion forums are really important, but it's not delegating it to, it's being part of that. And I'm how often, not just with issues of race, but with other issues, we can compartmentalize, and we have and not see it threaded through every area. So and you
can't delegate it because you're the leader, is you have the privilege, you are the most powerful person in that organization, mainly because you have the most control over how your personal professional time is spent, and people watch, they note how you spend your time, and they know what you do with it. And you know, the NHS is riddled with the notion that, so I'll give you an example. You know, a leader says that they're into inclusion and it matters and that race matters, but everybody knows, everybody around them has been handpicked by that person without much of a process. There is a process in the organisation, but everybody knows that Jim got the job because he knows Jayne. So if you do that, then everything that you say is going to be seen through in that light, because people will go, well, he's talking about inclusion, but everybody knows if you want to get promoted here, you've got to know Jayne. And there's a Politburo, and if you're outside that Politburo, you don't matter. And that in itself reduces psychological safety, and it diminishes people to speak up, because it's one rule for you, although you're saying something different, and another rule for everyone else. And that's what kills psychological safety in organisations. It's inconsistency.
Yeah, absolutely, Victor. So I wonder if I could just ask you a little more about that from your perspective and your experience. Interventions, interventions make simple. How do we foster safe psychological cultures? Because they are clearly key to speaking up. They are key to a good organisation. What do you feel is the bedrock of that?
I think it starts from the top. You know, if you haven't got it, then I think the leader has to accept that you haven't got it and ask questions about why you haven't got it. And the leader has to learn with the organisation. You know, so if you know that, and we all make mistakes, right? I'm not a perfect leader. Nobody is, right? But it's about accepting that and saying, well, this isn't a perfect organisation. We're all in the business of trying to make it better every day and every hour of every day in the interests of the patients. So I'm a great believer in alignment, an alignment between vision, values, strategy and operations. And I think it's the job of the leader to things aligned, which means actually accepting when things aren't aligned and saying, look, these are our values, but I don't think we're really living them at the moment. And I wonder why. And then encouraging honest answers, not saying that I know the answer, but what are the answers? What's going on? How are we going? Be curious. And I think if you're curious, it encourages others to be curious, and then it encourages people to speak up. Now, if you're doing it well, you will hear things that will make you feel uncomfortable. That's the first test. If you're not uncomfortable, you ain't doing it properly. If you're doing it properly, then people will say things to you that will be uncomfortable. And you mustn't react. You've got to tension, and then you triangulate and you look for, and just doing that in and of itself frees up an organisation to start asking questions of itself and its behaviours and its culture and how we do things around here. And I think the leader has to start that. It's very difficult. You can start it from other places. Leadership can happen from anywhere in an organisation. But if you want to do it properly and easy, and since we're talking about leadership, start at the top.
Yeah, and that is just so important, isn't it? I mean, that whole part of asking the questions and being curious, that's a key word. Being curious. So our staff survey, curious, that's a key word. Being curious. So our staff survey shows us X. Clearly people aren't feeling psychologically safe around here. So we ask them why, and we don't just ask them in a confrontational way or a way that they're not going to give us the information. We find different mechanisms to ask in a safe way that people can be honest, even if I've had a bit of concern over people giving comments anonymously, but that's information in itself. But we need to hear what people want to tell us, and then, as you say, it's not being defensive, it's taking it as information, and then it's acting on it.
Yes, I once came across a case where a woman was fired because she put out on WhatsApp that she didn't feel that her staff had been treated very kindly during COVID, and she got sacked for it. And the question I asked was, well, why would you sack somebody for it's an internal WhatsApp. She didn't publish it to the Daily Mirror or whatever. Why, if there wasn't some truth in what she's saying, why are you worried about it? If there is truth in what you're saying, you should be thanking her and when asking the question, well, is it true? How did we, despite what we said, we thought we treated everybody well, did we?
What was your experience? Yeah, help us understand.
Yeah, I don't think you need a staff survey to do that. I think you just need how we align with our values.
Yeah, the staff survey is really important, isn't it? Because that gives that extensive snapshot once a year. But it's also not a question to be asked only once a year. It's an ongoing dialogue, isn't it?
It is. It's a point. It's a triangulation point. It's information data, but there are other data.
Dialogue, isn't it?
It is. It's a point. It's a triangulation point. It's information data. But there are other data points, how a place feels. I always take on board, when I walk into an organisation, how I feel at reception, how the interactions between that person and other people in the reception, it's all, you get a feeling, that when you walk into a place, you know how you feel, whether it's something, a place you want to be or you want to be out of, and why is that? Sometimes because you're actually witnessing things that make you feel uncomfortable.
It's only one data point, but the NHS staff survey is currently open again for responses, and I'm absolutely delighted that for the first time this year bank workers are included because they've not been able to respond before. And that sort of made me think and want to ask you how you make sure that we're listening to those voices who are less heard, not just bank staff, but night workers, international recruits, trainees, volunteers, junior doctors, people who are digitally poor, who don't have access to computers at work, etc.
I think it's vitally important those people are included, because those people are more likely to have an honest view. I know that in London 50% of nurses are black, and London spends a lot of money on agency staff. And those agencies, those nurses, when I talk to them, a lot of them are our agency because they're so badly treated that they just go, you know what, I don't have to put up with this, and I could earn 50 pence an hour more or whatever. I'm out of here. And I think we need to be listening to those people, those bank workers, because the reasons why the bank workers aren't just because of their. Sometimes it's because they've been treated really badly, you know. And they've witnessed things, or they're in a psychologically unsafe place, you know. So I think it's really important we get that input.
Yeah, it is absolutely vital, isn't it? Do you have any experience of different methods to get those different voices? Because just an annual staff survey, annual staff survey isn't going to be enough.
No, well, I don't. The annual staff. I just think. I think you need to get into a rhythm. Some organisations I'm involved in, they do sort of weekly snapshot surveys. And if you just keep doing it, it becomes something sooner or later. People are going to answer it. Your focus groups, pay people to spend their time. Just make it. You got to keep going, particularly if it's been unsafe. It'll take a while for people to think. You know what? They mean this. They're not just mucking me about. So I think it's worth, stating it from the top, why you're doing it, what you want to see. Maybe an interview with the chief exec where they're a bit open and a bit honest, and then you follow that up with some little snapshot surveys, little encouragements, little windows of, well, we heard this and it was bad news. And people feel when we say, yeah, this was real, this was shocking, this is what we're going to do about it. Then every now and then you do a you told us, we did thing, and you just keep a dialogue. So it's not on transmit, you create series of virtual and actual dialogues, and you show the learning, and it just makes it safer and safer and safer and safer.
And it is that continual work at it, isn't it? It's not a simple one-off intervention. This is daily responsibility and work of leaders to be working on this important issue. That's so helpful, Victor, and I hope our listeners have found that helpful. And as we're coming towards the end of our time, I wonder if I could ask you to close by telling me what is your Speak Up pledge for this year.
Well, to be authentic about my value, which is that if you don't have a psychologically safe environment, then you don't have a safe environment. I like to think it's part of who I am. I haven't always got it right, but I think it's my intention. Therefore, my processes are focused on, psychological safety, because I know what happens when it's not safe. So, you've got me, basically. I'm a fan.
Thank you. Appreciate your time so very much, and I know our listeners will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victor, for taking the time to come on our podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Next time, Jayne will be joined by the Chief Executive of NHS Employers and the Deputy Chief Executive of NHS Confederation. It's our final week's theme of freedom to speak up for everyone. In a special one-off episode, Danny will be taking the reins from Jayne and will be interviewing her to celebrate our final week of Speak Up Month. Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. We welcome your feedback, so please like, rate and comment. Thank you for listening.